Pandemic Studios developed some of the most iconic games of the 2000s, like the original Star Wars Battlefronts, Destroy All Humans, and Mercenaries Playground of Destruction, but they mysteriously closed their doors in 2009. What happened? In 1998, Josh Resnick and Andrew Goldman were game developers at Activision who thought that they would do well operating under their own game studio, and so they did just that. Pandemic Studios was founded, and although Resnick and Goldman were technically departing from Activision, a relationship between the two companies formed almost immediately. In addition to investing $10 million in exchange for a 5% stake in the company, and agreeing to publish 5 of their titles, Activision also gave Pandemic the rights to Battlezone and Dark Reign: The Future of War, 2 titles that received a moderate amount of critical and commercial success. So, with a lot of money, a staff of 30 people, and the rights to 2 established IPs, Pandemic understandably did the expected, and developed Battlezone 2, Combat Commander, and Dark Reign 2 as their first 2 titles. In the company's formative years, they struggled to make their voice heard in the gaming industry, and had yet to tackle something big. This changed, however, when they partnered with LucasArts to develop Star Wars: The Clone Wars, which was initially released in October 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube. The game served as somewhat of a tie-in and follow-up to Attack of the Clones, and while it wasn't exactly praised, it was applauded for being an enjoyable and unique game set in the Star Wars universe. In 2004, they released Full Spectrum Warrior, which was adapted from a software called C-Force that the company made for the United States military. This game was their first to have major critical success, winning Best Original Game and Best Simulation Game at the Game Critics Awards. And later that year, Pandemic teamed back up with LucasArts to develop Star Wars Battlefront, inspired by DICE's Battlefield franchise. It was praised by critics and fans right away, and easily overshadowed their earlier Clone Wars game. With the first Battlefront performing and selling extremely well, Pandemic produced a sequel not long after, Star Wars Battlefront 2. The game improved upon many aspects of its predecessor, including the addition of space battles, better AI mechanics, and an enhanced campaign which guided you through classic missions from the perspective of the 501st Legion. Battlefront 2 was also favored by fans and critics, and performed better than the first in sales, with 7 million copies sold by 2007. In the midst of their success with the Battlefront franchise, Pandemic was also expanding their company and developing original titles. 2 original titles from Pandemic were released in 2005, Destroy All Humans, a humorous sci-fi action-adventure, and Mercenaries Playground of Destruction, an action-packed open-world shooter in the vein of Grand Theft Auto. Both titles were successful and showed the gaming industry that Pandemic, a now prosperous and promising studio, was finally making a name for itself. Perhaps a consequence of this success was the company losing their independence, merging with BioWare, the Canadian game studio responsible for Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, in late 2005. The deal was facilitated by former EA president and CEO John Riccitiello, and trust me when I say this isn't the last time you'll hear about that company in this video. Both studios claimed that they would benefit by being able to increase their talent, pool resources, stop rushing games, and focus on developing titles for the next generation consoles of the time, the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. This seemingly contradicted their releases from that point on, because their games from early 2006 into 2008 merely consisted of sequels that, for many, didn't live up to the expectations set by the originals. Though some were fond of Destroy All Humans too. Pandemic went from releasing 3 critically acclaimed and high-selling titles within the same year, to releasing 3 somewhat lackluster sequels over a span of 3 years. Despite the newer games being critically panned, they still managed to do well in sales. In January 2008, Pandemic and BioWare were acquired by video game giant Electronic Arts, otherwise known as EA, for a whopping $860 million. While EA was excited to expand their horizons into the action-adventure market, and Pandemic was ready for new opportunities, the move understandably received a lot of backlash from fans. Not only were fans scared that a large corporate entity was taking over a creative studio, but EA had a track record of acquiring smaller studios only to close them down or take their resources, like Origin Systems, Westwood Studios, and Bullfrog Productions. Little did Pandemic know, this acquisition would also mark the beginning of the end for them as a studio. They began work on a video game adaptation for Christopher Nolan's second Batman movie, The Dark Knight, in 2006. Unfortunately, it was plagued with problems throughout its development, mainly trying to create a large-scale open-world game with insufficient resources, tight deadlines, and a broken game engine. After the game was postponed upon missing the movie's July 2008 premiere deadline, it was cancelled by EA in October of that year, reportedly giving them a loss of $100 million. And shortly thereafter, EA closed Pandemic's branch in Brisbane, Australia, which was the same part of the company working on the Dark Knight game. At the beginning of 2009, Pandemic released The Lord of the Rings Conquest, and the game flopped. What originally was teased as an ambitious action experience in Middle-earth ultimately became a large target of negative criticism. People generally thought it was super repetitive, unbalanced, and extremely disappointing. Although a lot of horrible things were happening to the company at this time, Pandemic thought they might have had a saving grace. They were nearing the completion of an open-world World War II adventure game called The Saboteur. Before the game could be released, however, Pandemic was met with some bad news. In November of 2009, EA announced that they were entirely shutting down Pandemic Studios as a part of company-wide layoffs. 200 employees from Pandemic, including the studio's founders, were let go, with 35 being absorbed into EA's Los Angeles location to complete work on The Saboteur. The Saboteur was released a month later as Pandemic's swan song, and although it was well received, it was by no means a hit. Among the titles in development that were cancelled upon the closing of Pandemic were Mercenaries 3 No Limits, a racing game for the Wii called No Limits Racing, and a sequel to The Saboteur. In the immediate aftermath of this announcement, EA claimed that the Pandemic brand and properties would continue on without the studio, but nearly 10 years after this whole thing happened, we clearly know that this wasn't the case. A question pondering within the minds of many in the world of gaming was simply, why did Pandemic get shut down in the first place? While there's no exact answer, it seemed to be a combination of things. Co-founder Josh Resnick placed most of the blame on the gaming industry changing while dealing with an economic downturn. He said, "We were growing our teams and taking on ever bigger challenges. I mean, almost every project that Pandemic was working on at the time was a huge, unwieldy, massive world game. And they're just really expensive and really challenging from a technology standpoint." A former Pandemic employee said the studio's closure resulted from poor management decisions, including the promotion of employees based on loyalty, the misallocation of resources, poor milestone objectives, and no mentoring. Others claimed that Pandemic was losing too many resources since they previously relied on the support of several publishers, whereas after their acquisition to EA, they were limited to only having their games published by them. The culmination of these internal issues may have been major reasons why the studio wasn't delivering like it should have in its final years. As for BioWare, Pandemic's former sister company, they're still active in developing games today. While the studio was being acquired by EA, they released the first Mass Effect to critical and commercial success, and the sequel was also super successful. As for the rest of the Mass Effect franchise, that's a different story. In the time that's passed since Pandemic shut their doors for good in 2009, EA certainly hasn't been a stranger to controversy. But hey, let's look on the bright side. Word on the street is that they've been making some new Star Wars Battlefront games, and those must be pretty good, right? Right? Thank you guys so much for watching this. I was a little scared to upload this video because it's not about animation, but regardless, if you enjoyed it, please leave a like below and let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Also, I had a discussion with the amazing Pie Guy Rules about Thundercats Roar and the reactions to that whole situation, so make sure you check that out as well. See you guys in the next one.